Hey everyone, if you're considering an E2 investor visa, you might be wondering, how much do I need to invest to get approved? Well, the regulations specify that the investment must be substantial, but there is no particular dollar amount that's associated with the regulations. So it's a little bit confusing. What I want to do in this video is I want to help you better understand this requirement of substantial investment. So in a moment, I'm actually going to open up my computer and we're going to look at the actual regulations surrounding what a substantial investment amount is. After that, I'm going to explain these requirements so that they're a little bit more easy to understand. I think you're going to find this information very interesting, so let's get started. So I have the actual regulations pulled up here regarding the E2 visa, and if you can see where I'm highlighting over here, it discusses substantial, and it says interpretations of substantial. No set dollar figure constitutes a minimum amount of investment to be considered substantial for E2 visa purposes. Investment of a substantial amount of capital for E2 visa purposes constitute an amount that is, and then it breaks down three factors. 1. Substantial in a proportionate sense, as determined through the application of the proportionality test outlined below. And in a moment, I'm going to go over that proportionality test. Factor number 2, sufficient to ensure the treaty investor's financial commitment to the successful operation of the enterprise. And factor 3, of a magnitude to support the likelihood that the treaty investor will successfully develop and direct the enterprise. Now, in this subsection C over here, it's going to talk about the proportionality test. And what it says is, the proportionality test determines whether an investment is substantial by weighing the amount of qualifying funds invested against the cost of the business. If the two figures are the same, then the investor has invested 100% of the needed funds in the business. Such an investment is substantial. Most cases involve lesser percentages. The proportionality test can best be understood as a sort of inverted sliding scale. The lower the cost of the business, the higher a percentage of investment is required. On the other hand, a highly expensive business would require a lower percentage of qualifying investment. There are no bright line percentages that exist for an investment to be considered substantial. Thus, investments constituting 100% of the total cost would normally qualify for a business requiring a startup cost of $100,000, for example. At the other extreme, an investment of $10 million in a $100 million business may be considered substantial based on the sheer magnitude of the investment itself. So thanks for sticking with me while we went through all that legal language. What you can see here is that the regulations surrounding what is considered a substantial investment is not so simple. There are multiple factors that the immigration regulations consider. One factor is, what is this amount? Is this amount showing that the investor is committed to the successful operation of the business? Another factor has to do with whether this amount is sufficient to make it likely that this business will be successful. And the third factor is this proportionality test. Now, this proportionality test is very important. And what this proportionality test basically does is it analyzes what the cost of the business is. The lower the cost of the business, the greater the proportionality has to be between the investor's actual investment amount compared to the cost of the business. The greater the cost of the business, the lower the proportionality has to be between the investor's investment and the overall cost of the business. Now, just like the example in the regulations, if there's a business that costs $100,000, your investment should be as close to 100% of the cost of that business as possible. So if you're interested in buying a business that costs $100,000, for your investment to be considered substantial, you should be investing as close to 100% of that overall cost of that business as possible. So in that example, you should be investing as close to $100,000 as possible. That way you could demonstrate that, for example, if you're actually investing $100,000, you have 100% proportionality because the business costs $100,000 and you're investing $100,000. But let's contrast that with a much more expensive business. Let's say that you're interested in buying a business that costs $100 million. Now, that's a much more expensive business. So in this example, let's say that you invest $10 million towards that $100 million business. Well, in this example, you only have 10% proportionality because you're investing $10 million, whereas the cost of the business is actually $100 million. Well, in this case, even though you only have 10% proportionality, because the cost of the business is so high, that comes into play so that your $10 million investment can still be considered substantial, even though the proportionality is much lower than the earlier example of the $100,000 investment that is representative of 100% proportionality towards the overall cost of the business. Now, this might seem very confusing, but basically what I want you to know is this. The lower the cost of the business that you're planning on investing in, the greater your investment amount has to be in relation to the overall cost of the business. The greater the overall cost of the business, the lower your investment amount has to be in proportion to the overall cost of the business. That's basically the idea of the proportionality test. Now, I want to take this one step further. Regarding the E2 visa, every consulate basically has its own way that it wants somebody to apply for the E2 visa, and they have their own guidance. One consulate, for example, might have a 70-page limit in terms of the overall package of documents that you can submit to them when you're applying for an E2 visa. Another consulate might have a totally separate set of requirements when you're submitting your case for an E2 visa to that consulate. What I want to do right now is I want to pull up Australia's guidance for applying for an E2 visa. I'm going to go on the Consular website and I'm going to show you the section that actually talks about what is considered a substantial investment. I think you're going to find this very interesting. So take a look. So here we are. As you can see here, treaty traders and treaty investor visas apply for a US visa in Australia. We're looking at the guidance from the US embassies and the US consular posts in Australia. I'm just going to scroll down here to where we get to the point where the question is, what is a substantial amount of capital? And here it goes on to say, there is no fixed amount which is considered substantial. A substantial amount of capital constitutes that amount which is ample to ensure the investor's financial commitment to the successful operation of the enterprise as measured by the proportionality test. The proportionality test compares the total amount invested in the enterprise with the cost of establishing a viable enterprise of the nature contemplated or the amount of capital needed to purchase an existing enterprise. Such a comparison constitutes the percentage of the treaty applicant's investment in the enterprise. That percentage must compare favorably in the fashion of an inverted sliding scale, standing with a high percentage of investment for a lower cost enterprise. The percentage of investment decreases at a gradual rate as the cost of the business increases. An amount of capital invested in an enterprise is merely presumed to be substantial when it meets or exceeds the percentage figures given in the following examples. Amounts shown are in US dollars. 75% investment in an enterprise costing no more than $500,000. If the cost of the enterprise is substantially lower than $500,000, 85 to 90% or even 100% investment may be required. 50% investment in an enterprise costing more than $500,000 but no more than $3 million. And then the third bullet point says 30% investment in any enterprise costing more than $3 million. And then it goes on to say multi-million-dollar investment by a large foreign corporation is normally considered substantial, regardless of the examples given above. The investment must do more than merely yield a return capable of supporting the investor and family. A marginal enterprise is an enterprise which does not have the capacity to generate significantly more than enough income to provide a living for the investor, family, and other alien employees. So the reason why I wanted to share that example with you is because in these instructions, the consulates in Australia are giving you actual guidance in terms of what they consider to be sufficient proportionality. So as you can see, there's that example of a business that costs around $500,000. And it says that for a business that costs around $500,000, you should be investing at least 75% of that overall cost of that business. And it goes on to say that for businesses that cost significantly less than $500,000, that your proportionality, the amount that you're actually investing towards that business, should be closer to 85% to 90%, or even 100% of the overall cost of that business. And then it goes on to that next tier of businesses that are between $500,000 to $3 million. And it says that if the cost of the business is within that range, then your amount of investment should be at least 50% of the overall cost of that business. And then it goes to that third tier of businesses that are $3 million or more. And it says that in those examples, the amount of your investment should be at least 30% of the overall cost of that business. Now, I personally have only seen this level of detail in the guidance with Australia's instructions. I haven't seen it with other consular posts, but it's just something that's very interesting to see a very tangible application of the proportionality test in a consulate's actual instructions for potential E2 investors. So I know we went through a lot of information in this video, but the main things that I want you to take away are that when you're considering how much you need to invest in your business, there are multiple factors to consider. How much are you investing? And not just how much you're investing, but how much are you investing relative to the overall cost of the business. I hope you found this information informative. If you know anybody that could benefit from this information, please feel free to share this video with them. We're all about empowering you with knowledge. We're all about providing you with in-depth knowledge on US immigration. I hope you found this video helpful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. See you next time.